Christopher, to start, tell us a little about how the idea for the movie came about.
Yeah, it came from Marcus came to me. We've been working together for 25 years-ish. I mean, since we were teenagers. He had written maybe 20, 30 pages of a germ of an idea. He can tell you more about that, but kind of loosely inspired by some stories his mother had told him about him growing up in Puerto Rico. And but it was just a really interesting point of view for a classic exorcism story, which we both grew up loving. So to find a new way to approach that genre was super exciting to me. Marcus has more details for that.
Yeah, I mean, it was really, just looking at brujeria and brujas, and it was like one of those things where if I described it to someone else who was Latino or Hispanic, and they'd immediately be like, oh, my grandmother, oh, my auntie was like that. My tia was like, so it was like, oh, there's something here that's kind of hidden and untapped. And it was always something that I was fascinated with and wanting to know more about. I was raised Catholic, but my mother was always like, you don't mess with a fortune teller, you don't mess with this, So that was always something that I was really curious about and go like, okay, what other little nuggets are hidden that feel like they were very much alive and vibrant in the world. And now have fallen into the background and you won't find it unless you look in maybe the wrong places, but also using that as a world where we could explore and draw inspiration from.
Following that line, Marcos, you will have to face long days of documentation to represent all that demonic imaginary, I think. What process have you followed when approaching to the script for The Old Ways? What's your first steps?
Well, the first steps are the core of the character and the journey the character has to take. So looking at Christina's journey and facing this darkness inside of her, what are the steps that need to happen for her to get through it all? So as we looked at each one of those steps, trying to face it, draw something out, admit that it's there, deny it, all those things, we'd look at what is the practice that we can put in here or the ritual we can draw from. So a lot of that was looking at, practices that you would look at and go, ooh, okay, psychic surgery. That's something that people do. And I've seen, footage of before. How do we make it our own? Or the different painting of the faces and the hands and the palms, all these things, we tried to just look at what was out there in the world and then put our own reflection on it. So a lot of times in brujeria, it's really the practitioner who decides what the practice is. And it's sometimes instinctual and it's sometimes just feeling it out, what feels like the right thing to do. So we use that as kind of our guide as we said, okay, this is something that I've seen, but maybe we can make it a little bit more our own. And that was really fun. And then just depending on our wonderful actors to draw on their own experiences and their own cultures and bring a little more flavor to it all. It was really fantastic to see. So I just start with the germ of it, and then everybody else adds the soup, and then we've got a meal.
Yeah, it was very, very iterative. Started just with the character's journey, and then we would research and find amazing little nuggets of stuff. And as we started to zero in on exactly where in the world this was taking place, it wasn't, originally it was just kind of a generic jungle. And then as more script versions came out, it was like, well, it's in Mexico. Well, it's in this part. Well, it's right here in this part of Veracruz, outside of the city called Catemaco, that is known for their witchcraft. It's a part of the world that has Mayans influence coming up from Central America and Aztecs coming down from the rest of Mexico, and the Afro-Caribbean coming across the Gulf of Mexico, and the Spanish coming in with Catholicism. And it just had so much to draw from. And the people in that region who do practice this kind of picked and choose whatever made sense to them, to solve whatever problem they might be having. And it gave us a ton of freedom to use whatever was speaking to us and combine it in interesting ways. And it was a really fun, just archaeological experiment, you know, and lots of Googling, lots of putting your YouTube on safe search mode when you're searching for rituals and stuff like that. And things you would find would be pretty interesting. And just maybe we'd stumble across something like a death whistle, which is this amazing artifact they found buried in some tombs that they didn't even know what it was until years later somebody blew it and it made a horrible sound. And they started coming up with theories about what this was for. Was it used to fight spirits or to scare other armies? And it was just we just go running into the other person's room like, oh my God, throw that scene out. We're redoing it with this. It was really cool. It was fun.
Brigitte,
yes.
One thing that has caught my attention is the quality of the performances. Your role as Christina is very visceral, very physical. How did you prepare for the role? Did you carry an idea from the script or did you shape it on set?
I definitely shaped it on set. I had no idea it was going to become so physical. And then as we were staging it, it almost felt like I was suddenly like half Tomb Raider, half demon fighter, it just felt like it was morphing. And it was unexpected for me. I think when I read it on paper, it was so many actions on paper that you're just imagining it, but then all of a sudden you're there and you're like, oh, wow, this is very much so demanding.
Yes. I love the way the main narrative is woven with the metaphor of the human being going back to its roots. Was this concept, this idea always there?
Yeah. Thanks for noticing. That's what kind of draws me to the horror genre in general, I think, is that you really get to play with metaphor. I mean, it's really in your face. How much you can play with metaphors in horror and cultural questions and things like that. So that was definitely part of it. We really looked at like the drug withdrawal, kind of the patterns that you find in that whole healing process that people go through, and use that as a structural element. It helped us just plot out the story because it's something natural and real that almost everybody's either gone through or knows somebody who's gone through. So it feels very grounded in that sense, and then you get to play with the metaphor of like demons and carrying your demons and exercising your own demons, and both literally and figuratively. And it was just it's just a really grounded architecture, to start with, I think, that we all can kind of relate to in different ways, for sure. Yeah.
Marcos, The Odd Ways has space for certain comic moments. I confess that I laugh a lot with Christina's conversation with the rooster, or with when he said, any idea? Or with the phrase, I'm a motherfucking bruja. Where those ideas are already in the script. How you can find the balance between horror and these flashes of comedy?
I think that's, thank you so much for laughing. That's awesome. I think my favorite horror movies are the ones that are a ride, that go up and down, and not the ones that are just atonal and the whole way through you just feel the same texture. So if we could make a movie that shows you something horrific and then releases the pressure with a little bit of comedy and a funny moment, and then gets you tense again. And what Brigitte really brought was an emotional core that was, sometimes it was she could be very hard and then sometimes very vulnerable. So that was an extra instrument to play, which was amazing. And admittedly, it's not hard for me to add a little comedy to those moments because I'm kind of sick that way. And, to me, it's fun. Even the most horrific moments is kind of like, oh, there's a moment for a joke here or a moment for a laugh, because to me, I love the whole experience of that. So there's nothing that makes me more excited than thinking of an audience watching this movie and cringing at a moment and then laughing at a moment and then cheering at that line you just said. And if all of that happens, then I'm like,
I'm done.
Yeah, we were both heavily influenced by Sam Raimi and back in our youth, and we used to sneak into abandoned asylums and shoot horror movies when we were teenagers. And yeah, that's always all of our favorite.
That might be against the law.
Yeah, that was probably against the law. But you know, and Spielberg always does this, and a lot of the great '80s horror movies always had that moment, you know. But you got to ride the line, you know. But it's definitely, especially in a theater, it's wonderful to have that joke that comes out of nowhere that kind of lets everybody off the hook for a minute. Hopefully we'll get to experience that with the real audience one day.
Brigitte.
Yes.
Between you and me, how was working with Christopher Alender? It's a nice guy.
It was great. I mean, Chris was so open and receptive. Did you get
That was amazing.
Always making jokes. You know, he just made you feel like you were an important part of the process, and that your opinion was important to him, and the orchestrating of the scene. And he's very inclusive and collaborative, you know. And if I said, oh, but I feel like maybe I don't know, I feel like I should be coming in from here, he said, okay, let's try it. Everything was like an openness to try. And I think for any actor, that makes you feel a freedom that you're not often given. So I felt very grateful for that.
Finally, for all of you, the inevitable question in these times, how has the pandemic and the lockdown affected you in filming and post-producing the old ways?
Yeah, well, we wrapped production like less than 7 days before Los Angeles got shut down completely. And we had to fly to Miami and then back into LA. And when we landed, it was like a different world from when we left that morning to when we got here. It was like right when everything was starting to change. And we were, I had planned on doing a little bit of editing from home. My editor and I had both already planned on, like, since we both have small children, that we would, we took copies of the footage home, and we had Google Drive set up where we could exchange the bins and the sequences and stuff. And we had already kind of planned for that just because we wanted, like, just for quality of life. And then as soon as we started editing the movie, we were forced to do that. So luckily we'd already prepped for that scenario. So we did the whole thing over Zoom like this. Me and Marcus would sometimes spend 8 hours just with Zoom on and working on scenes, or we both ended up doing a lot of the VFX ourselves and working on the edit with our editor. And it was fine for the most part. The most challenging part was for me, I find being in the room with people watching rough cut.
The reactions.
Yeah, even just being in the room with them, even not talking to them afterwards, which is also helpful sometimes, but sometimes it's hard for people to articulate what they liked and didn't like. But just being around them, I can feel time seems to move at a different speed when you're around real people instead of in your room by yourself. And there's things that you lie to yourself about. You're like, no, that part's fine, it'll be fine. And then as soon as you're in a room with people, you're like, oh, that's the worst. We got to get rid of that. And people are fidgety here, or they actually laughed out loud here and you've forgotten because you've heard the joke 40 times and it's not funny to you. And all those little things we didn't get to do. And that's a real shame. I really like to have gotten to do that. And even some other movies I've produced in the past, you get to go to a festival and see it with 200 people and see it on another screen, and then go to a different state and see it with a completely different type of people and make more tweaks to the edit. And I don't know when we're going to get to do that because we're not allowed to travel this. The whole time we were filming this movie, our dream was to get into Sitges. I was like, this is the perfect Sitges movie. I want to go so bad. I had produced a movie that was in Sitges, but I didn't get to go. And I've been planning, like one day I'm going to make a movie and I'm going to get to go. And then we get in and then we're not allowed to go there. So that was really disappointing. So that part I think is a shame. But the editing is fine. The post-production is okay. And what's cool is we can hire people all over the world now instead of just in town. So that's exciting. And we literally had like our composers in North Carolina, the other half of the composing team's here. We had some other people down in the south part of LA, recording music all over the US. That was really cool. But it's going to be hard with production. Like we've done with our production company, we've done a few commercials and things like that in the past few months. And it's much harder and it's much slower and it's much more expensive.
So 10 years ago, this was not going to be possible.
No, absolutely.
With the internet and the technology today.
And we're still on the edge, for regular people. Michael Bay has been able to do this for 10 years. Like he's got fiber connection to his house in Miami and he's dealing with San Francisco in real time and 4K and everything. That's still a few years away for us, but it's getting there and there's workarounds. And if you're technically savvy and willing to figure stuff out, it's going to be a good opportunity, I think, for some clever independent filmmakers for sure. They're going to find ways to.
But, the process, there's ways to work around it. But for me, the thing that's been as we've gotten to this finish line, the thing that breaks my heart is that when you make an independent movie with a crew like ours, a small cast and crew, everybody works so hard. And the one thing we're missing right now is that real chance to celebrate together, which is normally, hey, let's all watch this movie. Let's get together, get in a theater and watch it. And, when we've had those moments, Brigitte, who's going to watch the movie this afternoon, we've had other cast members one at a time because of COVID. It feels good because it's like we want to share what we've been doing for, what everyone's put so much into it. And that's where the chance to like celebrate and laugh and hold and hug each other and go like, can you believe this is what we did? It's so much fun. So that's the part that's really just missing. We
had to cancel our wrap party. I mean, that was how we were able to finish filming, but we weren't able to have the wrap party because everything was locked off in between there. So, I had all kinds of plans for goat milk themed beverages and.
Again, congratulations for the movie and good luck. I really hope that the film has the path it deserves and you have a full success ahead of you. Thank you very much for your time.
Gracias, David.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias, David.